It does not announce itself. It simply appears ripping across the Antarctic plateau at speeds that erase sound and flatten distance. Snow does not fall here. It moves sideways, suspended in air, grinding against ice that has not known liquid water for millions of years. The temperature sinks beyond human measurement of comfort, far past frostbite, into a range where exposed skin fails in minutes and metal becomes brittle. This is the Antarctic winter, a season without sunrise. A continent sealed in darkness for months at a time. Nothing should live here. And yet, standing motionless against the wind, packed shoulder to shoulder on the frozen sea ice, tens of thousands of living bodies endure it. They do not migrate north. They do not seek shelter. They do not escape. They remain through the coldest winter on Earth by choice. The silhouettes are unmistakable. Upright forms, rigid against the gale. Black and white shapes blurred by blowing ice. Emperor penguins wait as the planet's most hostile season closes around them. But at this moment, the surface temperature hovers near minus 40 degrees Celsius. Wind chill drives the effective temperature far lower. For weeks, the sun will not rise. There will be no food, no open water, no margin for error. Any individual that miscalculates energy, timing, or position risks death within hours. And still, they stay. Not because Antarctica is gentle. Not because these conditions are survivable in any ordinary sense. But because leaving would be worse. This frozen gathering is not accidental. It is not stubbornness or blind instinct. It is the product of millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Answer forged slowly to a question no organism should ever face. How to reproduce when the environment itself seems designed to kill you. Today, we're diving into why penguins choose to freeze into Antarctica's deadliest winter as a spectacle of endurance, but as a precise biological strategy. A strategy shaped by physics, metabolism, behavior, and time. One that turns cold into protection, darkness into advantage, and collective suffering into survival. This is not a story about heroism. It is a story about constraints. About trade-offs so severe that evolution corners life into extremes, and about what happens when the safest place on Earth for a species is the most lethal place imaginable. Before we can understand how penguins survive the Antarctic winter, we must first understand why they enter it. At ALN, what invisible forces make this frozen gamble their only viable choice. As summer drains away from Antarctica, the ocean begins to lock itself into ice. Leads of open water seal shut. Waves steal, then vanish beneath a growing skin of frozen sea. By late autumn, the coastline becomes a rigid platform stretching hundreds of kilometers into the Southern Ocean. It is here on sea ice that will soon be battered by darkness and wind that emperor penguins arrive. They come ashore precisely as conditions deteriorate. From a human perspective, the timing appears irrational. Food access is about to collapse. Temperatures will plunge. Storms will intensify. Yet, for emperor penguins, this narrowing window is the safest possible moment to reproduce. The winter ice is not a threat. It is the nursery.sea ice. Stability is the first constraint. Emperor penguins require a surface that will not fracture or drift apart before their chicks are ready to leave. Summer ice is unreliable, prone to early breakup as solar radiation returns. Autumn ice, however, is thickening, consolidating, locking itself to the continent. By breeding at the onset of winter, penguins anchor their offspring to the most stable platform Antarctica offers. But stability alone is not enough. Timing must also match the ocean's productivity cycle. Penguin chicks cannot enter the sea immediately after hatching. They need months to grow waterproof feathers and develop muscle mass capable of sustained swimming. If chicks hatch too early, before the return of sunlight, parents cannot feed them. If they hatch too late, the sea ice disintegrates beneath them before they are ready. The winter breeding schedule aligns chick development with the Antarctic. Spring plankton, bloom windfish, and squid surge back into coastal waters. This synchronization is not flexible. It is exact. Eggs are laid at the coldest point of the year, when temperatures are falling toward their minimum. Incubation lasts through the heart of winter, with males fasting for more than 2 months while balancing eggs on their feet. Chicks emerge just as daylight creeps back onto the horizon. By early summer, when the ice begins to fracture, chicks are ready to swim. Any shift in timing? By weeks, even days can mean catastrophic failure. This precision explains why emperor penguins cannot simply breed earlier or migrate elsewhere. Lower latitudes offer warmer temperatures, but they lack reliable winter sea ice. Floating ice is unstable. Rocky shores expose eggs to flooding and predators. In Antarctica's interior, predators are scarce, but food is unreachable. Only the coastal winter ice satisfies all conditions simultaneously. Other penguin species avoid this gamble. Adelie chinstrap and Gen 2 penguins breed during summer, retreating from the interior as winter advances. Emperor penguins stand alone in choosing the season of maximum cold. Not because it is survivable in isolation, but because it minimizes every other risk. This choice reflects an evolutionary narrowing of options. Over thousands of generations, individuals that bred later lost their chicks to collapsing ice. Those that bred earlier starved. Only those aligned with the winter freeze succeeded. The result is a species locked into one of the most extreme reproductive schedules on Earth. The cold, in this context, is not an enemy. It is a framework, a rigid, predictable structure upon which survival depends. But winter offers more than stable ice. It also removes something equally dangerous: light. The polar night erases visual contrast. It collapses distance and silences much of the ecological activity that defines the Antarctic summer. For months, the sun will not rise. The sky remains a deep, perpetual twilight at best, a black void at worst. In this darkness, the rules of survival change. For emperor penguins, this absence of light is not a liability. It is a shield. Most Antarctic predators depend on sight. Skuas patrol breeding grounds in summer, scanning for exposed eggs and unguarded chicks. Giant petrels circle coastlines, exploiting moments of distraction. In the water, leopard seals hunt visually from below, ambushing penguins silhouetted against bright ice or open sky. These predators thrive when light is abundant and penguin colonies are exposed. Winter removes that advantage. By breeding during polar night, emperor penguins step outside the peak activity window of nearly every predator they face. Skuas and Petroses retreat or drastically reduce their activity when darkness and cold make flight inefficient. Leopard seals follow the shifting ice edge northward, tracking open water and prey-rich zones. The interior sea ice where emperor penguins breed becomes a biological desert. Predation pressure drops, not to zero, but close enough to matter in evolutionary terms. This reduction is enormous. Losing an egg to cold is random. Losing it to a predator is not. Predation introduces selective pressure that favors behaviors, locations, and timing that minimize exposure. Winter breeding accomplishes this with brutal efficiency. Darkness also reduces competition. Antarctica's productivity is seasonal. During summer, sunlight fuels phytoplankton blooms that ripple upward through the food web, drawing fish, squid, seals, whales, and birds into coastal waters. The ecosystem becomes crowded, dynamic, and competitive. Winter collapses that abundance. Photosynthesis halts. Biomass drops. Most species disperse or leave entirely. By remaining, emperor penguins occupy an ecological vacuum. This isolation carries cost chief among them. Starvation, but it also grants control. There are no competing seabirds at breeding sites. No aggressive neighbors fighting for space. No sudden influxes of scavengers drawn by noise and movement. The colony exists in near-total biological isolation, shaped only by weather and internal dynamics. Darkness further alters behavior within the colony itself. Without a solar day-night cycle, penguins rely on internal rhythms and environmental cues rather than light. Movement slows. Energy expenditure becomes conservative. There is no visual stimulus driving panic or unnecessary motion. Stillness dominates not as a choice, but as a necessity. The polar night also obscures individuals from distant observation. In summer, colonies are visible from kilometers away, dark clusters against white ice. In winter, blowing snow and low light erase those outlines. Even aerial predators struggle to locate targets. The colony becomes harder to find, harder to exploit. This does not make winter safe. Cold remains lethal. Storms still kill. But danger becomes predictable, governed by physics rather than biology. And predictability favors adaptation. Evolution does not reward comfort, it rewards consistency. By choosing darkness, emperor penguins trade immediate warmth for long-term reproductive success. They remove eyes from the sky, rivals from the ice, and much of the chaos from their environment. What remains is a singular challenge cold that their bodies and behaviors are uniquely equipped to face. Temperature is only the beginning. What defines the Antarctic winter is the way air moves, how gravity pulls dense, supercooled air off the interior plateau and accelerates it toward the coast. These katabatic winds can exceed 150 kilometers per hour, stripping heat from exposed surfaces with ruthless efficiency. In this environment, still air is survivable. Moving air is lethal. For emperor penguins standing on sea ice, heat loss follows three primary pathways: radiation, conduction, and convection. Each is magnified by Antarctic conditions. radiative heat loss occurs continuously. A warm body emits infrared energy into its surrounding. In Antarctica, the surrounding air and ice are far colder than the penguin's core temperature, creating a steep thermal gradient. Heat flows outward, relentlessly. Darkness offers no relief. Infrared loss is independent of sunlight. Conduction adds another drain. Penguins stand on ice that conducts heat away from their feet. Without protection, contact with frozen ground would rapidly draw warmth from the body's core. This is why emperor penguins never placed eggs directly on the ice. Skin-teeth contact is an invitation to thermal collapse. But the most dangerous mechanism is convection. Wind replaces the thin layer of warmed air that clings to the body's surface, exposing skin and feathers to fresh, colder air again and again. This accelerates heat loss dramatically. A temperature of -30 degrees Celsius with high winds can impose an effective heat loss equivalent to -60 or lower. Under these conditions, even well-insulated mammals die quickly if exposed. Antarctica offers no shelter. There are no trees, no rock outcrops, no burrows. The sea ice is flat, open, and merciless. Penguins cannot hide from the wind. They can only manage how much surface area they expose to it. This is where physics begins to shape behavior. Emperor penguins adopt an upright posture, not for balance, but for thermal efficiency. Standing reduces the surface area in contact with ice and minimizes conductive heat loss. Feathers overlap densely, trapping layers of air that slow radiative escape. Blood flow to extremities is tightly regulated, allowing feet to approach freezing temperatures without tissue damage. Biological compromise that protects the core. Even breathing becomes a thermal risk. Inhaling air at extreme cold can strip moisture and heat from respiratory tissues. Penguins reduce respiratory rates during rest, conserving both water and warmth. Individual physiology is not enough. A single emperor penguin standing alone in winter conditions cannot survive indefinitely. The physics are unforgiving. Heat loss eventually outpaces metabolic production. Fat reserves drain. Core temperature drops. Death follows. Survival depends on altering the physical environment itself. Penguins do not defeat the cold. They reshape it locally, temporarily by changing airflow, reducing exposed surface area, and trapping shared warmth. Before biology can succeed, physics must be negotiated. For emperor penguins, winter survival depends on an extreme metabolic strategy, doing almost nothing for as long as possible without dying. From the moment breeding begins, the rules of energy change. Food will soon be unreachable. Movement will become costly. Every unnecessary action becomes a liability. The foundation of this strategy is fat. Before winter arrives, emperor penguins feed intensively in the Southern Ocean, building massive lipid reserves beneath their skin. Its fat layer can reach several centimeters thick, forming both insulation and fuel. It is not simply stored energy, it is a thermal buffer, slowing heat loss while providing calories to maintain core temperature. Once breeding begins, feeding stops. Male emperor penguins, in particular, enter one of the longest fasting periods, known among birds, after females lay their single egg and depart for the sea. Males remain behind to incubate fasting for up to 4 months. During this time, they consume nothing. Their bodies must rely entirely on stored fat and carefully regulated metabolism. Metabolic rate drops dramatically. Heart rate slows. Activity becomes minimal. Muscles shift toward conserving energy rather than generating power. Protein breakdown is suppressed for as long as possible, preserving muscle tissue needed for balance and posture. Only when fat reserves near depletion does the body begin consuming muscle. Dangerous threshold. Few individuals survive. Pressing water, too, becomes an issue. With no liquid water available, penguins rely on metabolic water produced during fat oxidation. Even breathing too rapidly risks dehydration, as moisture is lost with every exhalation into super dry air. To compensate, penguins reduce respiratory rates and minimize exposure of moist tissues. The beak is often tucked beneath feathers, limiting heat and water loss. Eyes remain partially closed. Stillness dominates not from lethargy, but from calculation. Thermal regulation inside the body becomes highly selective. Blood vessels in the skin constrict, limiting heat loss to the environment. Extremities, feet, flippers, and beak are allowed to cool dramatically, sometimes approaching freezing, while the core remains near optimal temperature. Countercurrent heat exchange systems recycle warmth from outgoing blood, preventing tissue damage even at extreme cold. This physiological control comes at a cost. Tissue repair slows. Immune function is reduced. Any injury, infection, or metabolic error becomes more dangerous when energy margins are this thin. Winter survival leaves no room for redundancy. Yet this austerity works by lowering metabolic demands to the bare minimum. Emperor penguins stretch finite energy reserves across months of darkness and cold. They do not outlast winter by overpowering it, but by becoming nearly inert within it or live. Alert, but economize it to the edge of biological tolerance. Still, even this is not enough. No amount of fat or metabolic control can fully counteract Antarctic wind and temperature alone. Individual endurance has limits set by physics. It breathes, shifts, compresses, loosens, not randomly, but according to a set of physical rules that emerge only when thousands of bodies share the same space. This is not cooperation in the human sense. There is no leader, no coordination, no conscious agreement. What unfolds on the ice is thermodynamics expressed through behavior. When emperor penguins crowd together, they reduce their exposed surface area dramatically. The interior of the huddle becomes a sheltered microclimate, insulated from wind and buffered against temperature extremes. Measurements taken inside dense huddles reveal temperatures that can approach 0 degrees Celsius 7 when the surrounding air falls below -40. That difference is the boundary between survival and death. At the core of the huddle, penguins are packed so tightly that movement becomes nearly impossible. Individuals lean against one another, transferring heat directly through feathers and skin. Air trapped between bodies warms and stagnates, reducing convective heat loss. The wind, Antarctica's most lethal force, simply cannot penetrate. But no penguin can remain in the center indefinitely. Edges are colder. Wind scours exposed feathers. Heat drains faster. If individuals stayed fixed in position, those on the outside would perish, while those inside thrived. Instead, the huddle slowly rotates. The movement is subtle. A penguin at the edge takes a half step inward. Another yields space. Over hours, sometimes days, individuals cycle from the periphery to the core and back again. No one directs this motion. It arises automatically from thermal gradients and pressure. Cold individuals push inward. Warm individuals drift outward. The huddle self-organizes. This behavior is not optional. Penguins that fail to join huddles or that are excluded due to injury, weakness, or timing rarely survive the winter. Studies tracking body mass loss show that individuals spending more time at the huddle's edge burn energy faster and approach starvation sooner. Even posture inside the huddle matters. Penguins stand tall, minimizing contact with the ice eggs. Rest on the feet, insulated by a brood pouch and shielded by neighboring bodies. Flippers remain close to the torso, reducing exposed surface area. Heads tucked down, beaks hidden, eyes barely open. The huddle also reduces energy expenditure in unexpected ways. By buffering wind, it allows penguins to maintain core temperature with lower metabolic output. This slows fat consumption, extending fasting endurance by weeks. In a season where starvation is a primary cause of mortality, those weeks can determine reproductive success. There are risks. Crowding increases the chance of egg loss if balance falters. Sudden shifts can crush smaller individuals. But evolution tolerates these costs because the alterno exposure is worse. What emerges from this behavior is a collective organism. Larger and more resilient than any individual penguin, heat becomes a shared resource. Survival becomes distributed. In the Antarctic winter, isolation is fatal. Only by becoming part of a living structure, fluid, adaptive, and governed by physics do emperor penguins transform a killing environment into one they can endure. When a female emperor penguin lays her egg, it is immediately vulnerable. Exposed to Antarctic winter air, an unprotected egg can lose lethal amounts of heat in minutes. Direct contact with ice would freeze it even faster. There is no nest, no insulation from the ground, no margin for delay. The transfer must be precise. As soon as the egg emerges, the male rolls it carefully onto the tops of his feet, cradling it against his body. A fold of skin, the brood pouch, drops down to seal it in, enclosing the egg in a pocket of warmth just above freezing. The entire exchange takes seconds. Any slip, any prolonged exposure, and the embryo dies. From that moment on, the male cannot set the egg down. For the next 2 months or more, through the darkest and coldest part of winter, he stands nearly motionless, fasting, balancing the egg continuously. Shifting weight too abruptly risks rolling it free. Leaning forward exposes it to cold air. Even adjusting posture becomes a calculated act. Storms do not pause for incubation. Blizzards batter the colony. Winds screaming across the ice, snow blasting sideways. Visibility collapses. Temperatures plunge further. The male tightens his posture, presses inward toward the huddle, and trusts that the shared warmth will hold. Inside the egg, development is slow and fragile. Embryonic growth depends on stable temperature. Too cold, and development halts. Too warm, and metabolic demands exceed oxygen supply. The brood pouch regulates this narrow range with remarkable precision, maintaining egg temperature despite external extremes that would destroy unprotected tissue. This system evolved under relentless selection. Males that failed to maintain balance lost eggs. Those that shifted too often depleted energy too quickly. Those that could not endure the fast abandoned incubation or died standing. Over generations, only the most precise incubators passed on their genes. Yet even perfection offers no guarantees. Egg loss remains common. Sudden gusts can knock an egg loose. Crowding in the huddle can jostle balance. Extreme cold can overwhelm. Even the best insulation, in some years, entire colonies lose a significant fraction of eggs before hatching. When an egg is lost, there is no replacement. Emperor penguins produce only one egg per season. There is no second attempt. The male continues to stand, instinctively holding his feet together long after the egg is going to behavior thought to reflect delayed hormonal shifts rather than awareness of loss. Hatching, when it comes, is timed with extraordinary precision. Chicks emerge just as the first hints of daylight return to the Antarctic horizon. Females, having spent months at sea replenishing energy reserves, begin to return to the colony. Their arrival is not guaranteed. Storms, shifting ice, or poor foraging conditions can delay them. If the female does not return soon after hatching, the chick starves. To bridge this gap, the male produces a small amount of nutrient-rich secretion from his esophagus, sometimes called crop milk. It is barely enough to sustain the chick. 4 days, not weeks. This is the final gamble. If timing aligns, the female arrives, feeds the chick, and takes over care. The male, emaciated and depleted, finally leaves for the sea, having fasted for more than 4 months. If timing fails, the chick dies. Winter reproduction leaves no buffer, no redundancy, no forgiveness. Every step from egg transfer to hatching. 2. Parental reunion must align within an unforgiving environment. And yet, enough do succeed. Not because the system is safe, but because it is the only system that works. What remains, when it fails, is written into the species itself, through loss, through selection, and through the slow reshaping of survival strategies over time. For every chick that survives to summer, others vanish quietly into the Antarctic winter. Too cold, starvation, storms, or timing that slipped just enough to become fatal. There are no mass die-offs in the dramatic sense, no single catastrophic event. Loss arrives incrementally, invisibly, one body at a time. Evolution counts those losses. Eggs are the first filter. Even under ideal conditions, a portion never hatch. Temperature fluctuations inside the huddle, brief exposure during storms, or simple imbalance can end development. These losses rarely leave traces. An egg slips, freezes, and disappears beneath drifting snow. Chicks face even steeper odds. After hatching, survival depends on synchronization between male endurance, female return, and environmental stability. A female, delayed by shifting ice or poor foraging conditions, may arrive days too late. The chick, sustained briefly by the male's limited secretion, starves. The male, already near metabolic collapse, may abandon the colony or die before reaching the sea. Adults are not exempt. Extended fasting pushes males to physiological limits. Individuals that enter winter with insufficient fat reserves, often younger or less experienced birds, are more likely to die before relief arrives. Storms can force prolonged exposure at the edges of huddles, accelerating energy loss. In extreme years, mortality among adults increases measurably. Sea ice itself introduces another layer of risk. The same stability that makes winter breeding possible can turn treacherous if conditions change unexpectedly. Early ice breakup strands chicks before they are ready to swim. Late formation delays breeding altogether. In recent decades, variability in sea ice timing has increased, amplifying these risks without offering compensatory benefits. None of this is accidental. Natural selection operates not by preserving individuals, but by refining strategies across generations. Emperor penguins are not optimized for survival in all conditions. They are optimized for survival under a narrow, historically stable set of constraints. When those constraints shift, the cost is immediate. This is why emperor penguin populations fluctuate widely between years. Some seasons produce high chick survival. Others collapse almost entirely. Over evolutionary time, these fluctuations are tolerable. Over short timescales, they are destabilizing. Yet the species persists because the strategy still works. Those individuals whose physiology allows deeper fasting, whose behavior places them longer in the huddle core, whose timing aligns more precisely with environmental cycles, these traits propagate. Loss sharpens the system. Failure trims variation. There is no adaptation without death. What makes emperor penguins remarkable is not that they avoid failure, but that their reproductive strategy accepts it as inevitable. They operate at the edge of what biology allows, where success is narrow and costly, but alternatives are worse. Evolution has not given them flexibility. It has given them precision, and that precision now faces conditions it did not evolve to anticipate. Understanding what remains unknown, where the limits truly lie, requires looking beyond survival itself toward the boundaries of life under extreme constraint. The ice stretches unbroken to the horizon. The wind does not ease. The darkness remains complete, and yet, embedded within this frozen stillness, a biological system continues to function, barely, precisely, and without margin. Emperor penguins exist at a boundary, not between land and sea, but between what biology can tolerate and what physics demands. Their survival is not a triumph over nature. It is a negotiation with it, one that has been refined to exact limits over evolutionary time. What makes this strategy extraordinary is how little flexibility it contains. There is no alternate season, no backup breeding site, no shift in behavior that can easily compensate if conditions change. Emperor penguins do not adapt quickly. They cannot afford to. Their success depends on environmental predictability, on ice that forms when it always has, on seasons that arrive in the same sequence, on food webs that recover on schedule. For most of their evolutionary history, Antarctica provided that consistency. The winter was brutal but reliable. The ice returned. The darkness came and went. Within those fixed constraints, selection sculpted a strategy that works not every year, not for every individual, but often enough to persist. What remains uncertain is how close this system already operates to its absolute limit. Physiologically, emperor penguins cannot fast much longer. Their fat reserves, metabolic suppression, and protein conservation already push against thresholds where organ failure begins. Behaviorally, huddling efficiency cannot increase indefinitely without increasing injury or egg loss. Reproductively, there is no room to shorten incubation or accelerate chick development without cascading consequences. There is no obvious buffer left to exploit. This makes emperor penguins valuable not just as a species, but as a biological signal. They reveal how life functions when every parameter is constrained, when survival depends on timing measured in days, temperatures measured in degrees, and behaviors measured in centimeters of space. They show that extreme adaptations do not produce resilience in the way we often imagine. They produce specialization, and specialization, while powerful, is fragile. Even so, uncertainty cuts both ways. There are limits we do not yet fully understand. How much behavioral flexibility exists within carnines? How much physiological variation remains unmeasured? How many individuals succeed under conditions we assume are lethal? Antarctica still withholds answers. And emperor penguins continue to survive in ways that challenge our assumptions about endurance. Standing on the ice, as winter loosens its grip and the first light returns, the colony does not celebrate survival. It does not mark success. It simply continues. Chicks call into the wind. Adults shift, thin, and leave for the sea. The system resets. Indifferent to outcome. What emperor penguins offer is not a lesson in heroism or persistence, but a clearer view of biology at its edge, where life does not conquer its environment, but fits itself, precisely and precariously, into the narrow space where existence remains possible.